In the dark forest of Marbaden, a little girl in a red cloak was gathering flowers, filling her basket. But she was disturbed by a low growling sound from behind. She gets away from the place and stumbles upon a tree, only to see it creak and shift, moving as if alive. Fear gripped her, and she sprinted toward the village. The howls of wolves pierced the air, growing louder as she got away. Just as the sight of the village came into view, a flash of lightning cracked, confusing an old man who heard her distant cry but couldn't tell where it came from. The little girl turned back, her eyes wide with terror. She runs for her life, but before she can make it back to her home, the beast jumps on her. When the storm passed, the forest was still again. All that remained was the little girl's red cloak, tangled in the branches of a tree. In 1796, within French-occupied Germany, Will and Jake Grimm were renowned for defeating witches, though always for a price. Their latest destination was the town of Karlstad, where a haunting at the local mill had everyone terrified. The mayor recounted the dark tale of a witch's ghost terrorizing the mill, and Jake dutifully scribbled the details into his book, a collection of myths and stories from across the land. The brothers were intrigued, but demanded a hefty fee. Although the mayor hesitated at the cost, he reluctantly agreed. They were the only ones who could handle such a menace. Therefore, the Grimms prepared for the task with the mill owner's help, drawing a 5-pointed star on the floor, donning armor, and filling their weapons with baby tears, an old folk remedy. But before they could finish, the witch ghost appeared, forcing them to act fast. Chaos erupted as the brothers scrambled with mismatched tools. The witch's magic turned their weapons against each other, yet their experience saved them. They broke free from her control and with well-aimed shots, struck her down. Her body dissolved into a mass of writhing snakes. Jake quickly bagged them, instructing the mill owner to seal the bag in a mirror-lined box and bury it far from water. With the task complete and their payment secured, the brothers revealed the truth. The witch wasn't real. The supernatural spectacle was a clever trick orchestrated by their accomplices, Hiddlich and Bunst, using Jake's knowledge of myths and special effects. The Grimms made their living by fabricating terrors, then charging townsfolk to vanquish them. That evening, the brothers celebrated their success at an inn, but their triumph was short-lived. In the dead of night, they were ambushed by Italian torturer Mercurio Cavaldi and French soldiers. Bound and dragged through the inn, the brothers were taken the next morning to General Vavarin Delatome. Delatome had captured Hiddlich and Bunst, who confessed everything about the Grimm's fraud. Furious, the general planned to execute Will and Jake for their crimes. But he had another idea. The brothers could earn their lives by solving a real mystery. In the nearby town of Marbaden, children were vanishing, the latest being a girl in a red cloak. Whoever was behind it used tricks that mimicked magic. The Grimms reluctantly agreed, knowing they had never faced anything like this before. In the dark woods of Marbaden, 2 more children wander off while searching for the missing girls. The boy tries to leave a trail of breadcrumbs, but the girl becomes distracted by the idea of finding a witch's house. She strays from her brother, her shawl landing on a branch. As she chases it down a riverbank, the shawl falls into a bug-filled hole. That's where the huntsman finds her, lurking in the shadows. The next day, Cavaldi drags the brothers to Marbaden. The villagers greet them with suspicion, clutching weapons and glaring. But when a young girl, Sasha, steps forward, praising the brothers' supposed heroism, the crowd reluctantly agrees to let them help. Jake listens closely as the villagers recount the scary details of the disappearances, noting them carefully in his book. Meanwhile, Will grows uneasy, realizing how expensive it would be for someone to fake such elaborate tricks. To investigate, they need a guide who is familiar with the forest. The villagers send them to Angelica, a skilled trapper and huntress. Her sisters were the first to vanish, and the villagers believe she's cursed. At first, Angelica refuses to help, but when the brothers promise they can save the children, with Cavaldi's temper flaring dangerously, she agrees to join them. Without the knowledge of the group, the huntsman watches from a distance. As they enter the dense forest, Angelica warns them to leave their horses behind for the final stretch. They eventually reach a towering, crumbling structure surrounded by spooky crypts. Angelica explains the haunting history of the tower. Long ago, a Christian king destroyed the forest people to build a town. His wife, the Mirror Queen, was famed for her beauty but consumed by arrogance. When the plague came, it took the king and nearly everyone else. The queen, desperate to survive, built the tower and locked herself inside. But the wind carried the plague to her, and her screams echoed for miles as she rotted away. The town fell, and the forest reclaimed the land. Angelica remembers the story being told to her by her father like it was yesterday. As Angelica speaks, the huntsman feeds spiders to one of the group's horses. Jake grows uneasy, feeling the trees shift around them. Bugs swarm, crows caw, and Angelica insists they leave immediately. Will questions her chosen path, but she warns against trusting the forest trees. She picks up a toad, gives it a lick, and calls it Grandma Toad. The toad points the direction, guiding them safely back to their horses. Back in town, Angelica announces she won't return to the forest. Her father was taken by wolves, and her sisters vanished soon after. The villagers labeled her cursed, which poisons her life. Will, frustrated, insults her, leading to a heated argument. Furious, Angelica decides to continue searching on her own. As night fell, Jake's horse began whining loudly in the stables. A curious little girl, hearing what she thought was a voice calling for help, went to check. She commented on the horse's unusually big eyes and mouth, until she saw its jaws packed with sticky spiderwebs. Before she could react, the horse's mouth stretched impossibly wide, swallowing her whole. The Grimms rushed to the stables, alarmed by her screams, only to find the horse with a swollen belly and the girl trapped in its throat. Horrified, they watched as the beast bolted into the forest. While chasing it, Will and Jake argued over how such an elaborate trick could be done, but their debate stopped when they spotted Angelica running ahead. The group followed her deep into the woods, determined to save the girl. But the forest itself seemed alive. Trees moved, their branches reaching to block their path or crush anyone who got too close. Several of Cavaldi's men were killed before Angelica broke free of the tangle. She caught sight of a wolf and, driven by the memory of her father's death, gave chase. Yet when the wolf drew near, it didn't attack. Instead, it paused, gazing at her with a strange, intelligent expression before vanishing into the shadows. Shaken and bloodied, the party retreated to the village. Jake, now convinced the forest was cursed, shared his fears, but will dismiss them as elaborate tricks. Cavaldi sided with Will for a moment, and then blamed the brothers for his men's deaths. Soon after, Cavaldi reported to Delatome, demanding punishment for the Grimms and Angelica. Delatome scolds Cavaldi for his incompetence and has captured the brothers along with Angelica. When Jake tried to explain the forest's magic, Delatome scoffed. Desperate, Jake spun a new tale. The strange events were part of a secret plot by German rebels. Intrigued by the possibility of rebellion, Delatome decided to let them live, but only under one condition. If they failed to solve the mystery or tried to escape, he would burn the entire town and forest to the ground. With no choice, the Grimms returned to Marbaden, this time with Hidlik and Bunst. Will whispered plans of running away, but Jake had other ideas. He had recalled an old story about the tower in the forest, one that ended with the Mirror Queen casting a spell for eternal life. If true, she might still be there, waiting for someone to find the final spell. Jake approached Angelica for help, but Will interrupted, mocking his brother for believing in fairy tales. Stung by the insult, Jake stormed off into the dangerous forest alone. Alarmed, Angelica and Will tried to follow, but Cavaldi intervened. Grabbing Angelica, he declared she would stay with him as leverage to ensure the Grimms returned. In the forest, Jake tested a makeshift catapult with Hidlik and Bunst, hoping it could get him into the tower. Will arrived, trying to stop the reckless plan, which led to an intense argument. Jake, furious, punched his brother. He accused Will of always undermining him, pointing out how he'd spent his whole life studying fairy tales, and now that he'd found one that was real, all he needed was Will's support. Feeling guilty, Will admitted he'd been selfish. He suggested a better idea. Instead of using the dangerous catapult, they could climb the tower with a grapple and rope. As the brothers worked together, Hidlik and Bunst grew terrified when a swarm of insects suddenly surrounded them, and they ran back to the village. In the village, Sasha was drawing water from the well when something strange happened. She pulled up a crow, which started flinging mud at her. As she wiped her face, she realized, to her horror, that her eyes and mouth were gone. Then, a pile of mud rose from the bucket, forming into a gingerbread man. The creature wreaked havoc, stretching its sticky arms and absorbing everything it touched. Angelica, Cavaldi, and the townsfolk tried to stop it, but no matter what they did, the mudman pieced itself back together and stretched its arms, snatching Sasha into its body and jumped into the well. Meanwhile, Jake and Will began their climb to the tower. Jake ascended while Will manned the rope below, but bad luck struck when the rope snapped. Jake barely managed to cling to the roof, pulling himself up just in time. From the top, he noticed 12 crypts surrounding the tower, arranged like numbers on a clock. He climbed inside and found creepy remnants of the past. The queen's crown, her throne, and an ancient spellbook. The book revealed a blood moon over the 12 crypts. Jake realized the queen had already claimed 11 girls, and only one more was needed to complete her spell. Down below, Will heard strange sounds in the woods. He called on Grandma Toad, licking her for guidance, but his plans changed when he spotted Sasha near a lake. He watched in horror as the wolf entered the scene, transforming into the huntsman. Hiding, Will saw the huntsman gently place Sasha into the final crypt, declaring it was for his beloved queen. Once the huntsman left, Will hurried to free Sasha, but the huntsman reappeared, attacking him with a deadly axe. Inside the tower, Jake stumbled upon the queen's bed, where her decayed body rested. Suddenly, she stirred. Jake fled in terror, only to find himself facing a massive mirror. In its reflection, the queen appeared young and radiant, whispering his name and promising to fulfill his deepest desires. Jake, enchanted, nearly fell under her spell when the mirror shattered. Will, desperately throwing a rock through the window to escape the huntsman, had saved him. Jake grabbed the queen's impossibly long hair and used it to swing out of the tower, landing on the huntsman and knocking him unconscious before he could harm Will. Grabbing the axe and Sasha, the brothers fled into the forest. The trees tried to stop them, but the huntsman's axe acted as a magical ward, clearing their path. As they ran, Jake explained the queen's plan. She had granted herself eternal life, but not eternal youth, and the spell to combine both required the 12th girl during the blood moon. Back in the village, the Grimms warned the townspeople about the upcoming danger. They revealed that the queen would strike during the next eclipse and urged everyone to leave the village and hide their children in the city. Before they could make any progress, Delatome arrived with his troops and the lifeless bodies of Hidalik and Bunst. Furious and determined to keep his promise, he accused the Grimms of lying and stealing. The brothers had no choice but to surrender, dropping the enchanted axe to the ground before being dragged into the forest. In the clearing, the soldiers tied up the brothers and set the trees on fire, including Jake's precious notebook of stories. Delatome watched the flames spread, convinced he had won. But while his troops celebrated, Angelica managed to recover the axe from where it had fallen. Using it, rescued Jake and Will. The trio fled deeper into the forest, but their escape led them straight to the wolf. To their shock, the wolf transformed into the huntsman, and Angelica realized the terrible truth. It was her father, enslaved by the queen's spell. The huntsman admitted he had been kidnapping girls for the queen, unable to resist her magic. He reclaimed his axe, his face full of sorrow and rage. But instead of helping them, he turned his fury toward his daughter. As the huntsman advanced, Will distracted him with fire, giving Jake time to grab Angelica. However, she slipped from his grasp and tumbled into a nearby lake. The huntsman waved his hand, freezing the water solid, trapping Angelica beneath the ice. Then, shifting back into his wolf form, he sprinted toward the tower, leaving Jake frantically breaking the ice. But it was too late. Angelica had become the 12th girl needed for the queen's spell. Back at the tower, the queen awakened. With a single gesture, she extinguished the spreading fire, summoning a wind so fierce it scattered the frightened townsfolk and most of the soldiers. Delatome, enraged by their cowardice, began shooting those who fled. But when the smoke cleared and the Grimms were nowhere to be seen, Cavaldi dared to call it a miracle. Meanwhile, the brothers hurried to the tower and saw the huntsman placing Angelica into the last crypt. Moments later, a swarm of crows descended, lifting the huntsman and carrying him to the queen's chambers. The brothers rushed to free Angelica, but the crypt would not budge. Even the enchanted axe failed to break it. Before they could try anything else, Delatome arrived with Cavaldi and his manservant, ready to finish them off. He ordered Cavaldi to shoot, but when Cavaldi refused, Delatome turned on him and fired without hesitation. As he aimed at the brothers, a branch wrapped around his feet, giving Jake just enough time to push him away. Jake fled, pursued by the manservant, who dodged the axe when Jake threw it. But the enchanted axe, acting like a boomerang, returned and struck the manservant down. While Jake prepared the catapult, Will faced Delatome in a desperate fight. Delatome's strength overwhelmed Will, but in a moment of cleverness, Will activated one of his trick crosses, igniting it with flames. The burning cross forced Delatome to retreat, giving Will the chance to grab the general's flagpole and drive it through him. The impact sent Delatome tumbling down the rocky stairs, which began to crumble. The collapsing stones struck the catapult, launching Jake through the tower window. Inside, Jake found the huntsman preparing the queen for the final spell. Desperate, Jake grabbed a nearby sword and charged, but the queen used her magic to toss the blade and Jake aside. He was pinned to the wall by her long, enchanted hair, which now dangled out the window. Below, Will saw the hair and climbed up, determined to help his brother. The queen's power was growing, and time was running out. Will grabbed a dagger and charged at the queen, determined to stop her. But her magic was too strong. She twisted his mind, forcing the brothers to turn on each other. Under her spell, Jake was horrified as his hand moved without his control, accidentally stabbing Will. Completing the 12 crypts on the blood moon brought back the queen's beauty. Then, as Jake was freed from her control, the queen kept Will enslaved, turning him into her puppet. She took the stake that had been lodged in the huntsman's chest all along and drove it into Will, ordering him to complete the final spell. While the queen focused on her sinister plan, Jake saw his chance. He grabbed the enchanted axe and, with all his strength, struck the mirror. The glass shattered, and with it, the queen began to crumble into pieces. Freed from the queen's control, the huntsman, filled with rage and sorrow, decided to end her reign once and for all. He grabbed the last shard of the mirror and leaped out of the window, sacrificing himself to destroy the queen's lingering power. Will, driven by loyalty to his queen, dove after him in a desperate attempt to save the shards. But it was too late. The queen's magic collapsed along with the tower, burying them both. Jake narrowly survived, cushioned by the queen's many mattresses scattered throughout the tower's remains. Cavaldi appeared, miraculously alive, having survived Delatome's bullet thanks to the brother's hidden armor he'd been wearing. Cavaldi dragged Will's unconscious body from the rubble, but the danger wasn't over yet. The eclipse was still in the sky, and Jake realized what needed to be done. Cavaldi reminded Jake of how the story ended, with a kiss of true love. Jake rushed to Angelica's crypt and kissed her, breaking the spell. One by one, the other 11 girls awoke, freed from their cursed slumber. Jake turned to Will, ready to revive him too, but Will, barely able to speak, whispered that it wasn't Jake's place. Instead, Angelica stepped forward and kissed Will, bringing him back to life. As dawn broke, the group returned to town with the rescued girls. The townspeople cheered, overjoyed to see their loved ones safe. A celebration erupted, full of music and laughter.